Hello, everyone. Welcome to the St. Louis Art Museum's Art Speaks program. My name is Jessica Kennedy, and I'm the educator for adult learning at the museum. Before we begin, please familiarize yourself with the Q&A section located on your screen. Feel free to enter your questions at any time during the program, and we will choose a few to answer at the end. Also, there is live audio transcription available for this program. Please click the CC icon to activate or deactivate the subtitles. Today's program, Art as Advocate, is the last in a series of talks in conjunction with the exhibition Art Along the Rivers, a bicentennial celebration, which is now on view at the museum. For this installment, we are joined by Amy Torbert, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation Assistant Curator of American Art. Thanks for being here today, Amy.
Thanks, Jessica. And thank you all so much for being here too. It's so funny, just by way of explanation of my background, here typically in most talks is the St. Louis Art Museum. I am actually coming to you live from New York, as they say, thanks to the generosity of the D. Wigmore Gallery. So I'm in New York to give a talk at a conference and also to talk about Art Along the Rivers. So I am so happy to be with you here today and sharing this virtual space. I truly cannot believe that we have reached the end of our virtual tours or talks on Art Along the Rivers. It feels a little bit bittersweet, but we still have one more to go. So let's get started. So for those of you who have been with Melissa Wolf, my co-curator, and me for this entire sweep of the exhibition, you know well that our exhibition is organized in conjunction with the 200th anniversary of Missouri statehood. And so we chose this particular region to focus on, the region here in yellow, which we've called the Confluence region. If you would like to know more about this region, why we selected it, or really any of the other sections, which we're seeing here on a floor plan in the exhibition, they are slowly becoming available online. Well, I'm sorry, Jessica, they're not slow. So the first 3 are available currently online. And then the talks on sections 3, 4, and then today's talk will be available in the coming weeks if you'd like to revisit any of them. So all of the 155 objects in the exhibition were either made or collected within that confluence region, that area on the map, and they were selected in order to tell histories of creativity and artistic production in and around the confluence region. So we decided to present this exhibition thematically, as many of you probably know by now, and we are going to talk today about this 5th and final section, which we've titled Art as Advocate. And so here are 2 installation views of it. And this section is shaped around a central question, which is, how do artists advocate for particular political, social, or environmental viewpoints? And so simply put, the artworks in this section draw attention to these politics, people, and places. Some of them communicate support for particular political policies or promote recognition of people from marginalized groups. Others counter social injustices or investigate relationships between humans and nature. So we're going to dive in. Unlike the last time I was on the screen when I attempted to talk about 45 objects in section 3 in about 45 minutes, we have only about 12 that we're going to talk about today. So maybe we'll take a little bit more leisurely pace. But I'd really like to begin our tour by acknowledging a meaningful coincidence. Today, of course, is Veterans Day. And so what we are looking at here are works of art in the exhibition by artists or depicting sitters who served in the military. And so their years of service stretch from the 7 Years' War in the 18th century with Daniel Boone through the Civil War, through World War I, and then up to World War II. And this probably isn't an exhaustive list, but it's at least a starting point. But there is an even more explicit connection to today's talk, which is that the fifth section includes an object that directly considers the ideas of service and sacrifice that might be at the forefront of our minds on Veterans Day. And this is this object, Daniel Fitzpatrick's editorial cartoon from World War I. So Veterans Day, of course, marks the armistice of World War I. And even though we've missed just slightly the 11 11 11 moment, right? The 11th minute of the 11th hour of the 11th day in the 11th month. Did I get that right? I hope. Which is the signing of the armistice. Even though we've missed that moment of it, we can still acknowledge the fact that this is just a great coincidence that we are able to talk about a World War I editorial cartoon on the day that the war ended in 1918. So it ended in 1918, just a few months after Fitzpatrick published this searing critique of the war in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in July 1918. So from 1913 to 1958, Fitzpatrick served as the cartoonist for the paper, which syndicated his work on a national scale, and he won multiple Pulitzer Prizes for his work. So in this cartoon, a giant hand releases a mass of figures which tumble into an undifferentiated pile alongside a row of crosses. The day before this cartoon was published, the Post-Dispatch's headline read, "Germans open attack on 65-mile front in Champagne. Americans fighting gallantly under violent attack." This campaign that the headline was describing came on the heels of the Battle of Belleau Wood, where US troops experienced their first significant battlefield casualties, and just days after their numbers had risen overseas to more than 1 million. With its stark and emotionally charged title, again expressed the nation's fatigue and dismay as American involvement in World War I stretched into its second year. So as Melissa and I conceived this section, works like Again immediately came to our minds. But we also included perhaps less expected works of art with political messages, such as this painting by George Caleb Bingham. And for those of you who are just like biding your time waiting for, where is Bingham in this show on Missouri? Your patience has been rewarded. Here he is. So Bingham began his artistic career as a young man living in Boonville and Arrow Rock, Missouri, to the west of St. Louis, in the 1830s. By the 1840s, he had earned national fame with his paintings of scenes of daily life on rivers. But Bingham was as much a politician as he was an artist, and he often used his paintings to lobby on behalf of investment in his home state of Missouri. So here, dangers lurk in the background of this idyllic scene. A sandbar lies menacingly to the left of the raft, and a fallen tree punctuates the river's surface to the right. Both features were capable of wrecking rafts and steamboats alike. So Bingham was a Whig politician who served in the state legislature. Throughout the 1840s, the Whig platform advocated for the federal government to fund the cleanup of things like sandbars and snags in the Missouri and Mississippi rivers as part of the party's desire to integrate Missouri more fully into the national economy. As this vision relied on the ability of goods to move from west to east, clean rivers without impediments to navigation were a really crucial part of their vision for integrating Missouri into the national economy. Bingham also included a second element to advocate for federal investment. So in sharp contrast to the typical image of river laborers, who were frequently portrayed as vulgar, violent characters, the raftsmen here appear clean and collegial, civilized folks who could be trusted to uphold the pursuits of the nation. So if Bingham used his paintings to send kind of quiet political messages, especially to those in the know, the St. Louis artist Joe Jones was explicit in addressing federal legislation with local consequences. As some of you might remember from SLAM's 2011 exhibition on the artist, Jones was a nationally recognized social realist artist during the Great Depression, who used his paintings to express his ardent beliefs in labor and racial equality. So this painting, We Demand, presents a group of racially integrated labor protesters marching under elevated railroad tracks in downtown St. Louis. Four African-American figures, a family of three, followed by a veteran, another lovely coincidence, lead the demonstration. Their leadership reflects Jones's recognition of the central role played by Black protesters in St. Louis radical politics of the 1930s. And so the man here in front holds a poster referencing H.R. 7598, which was a workers' unemployment insurance bill that was then being debated in Congress. And it called for complete coverage of the unemployed, a topic that tragically feels all too relevant today. So We Demand expresses Jones's belief that art had the power to impact social policy. As he said, I love this quote, "I'm not interested in painting pretty pictures to match pink and blue walls. I want to paint things that knock holes in the walls." So the sculptor John Rogers also drew on local experiences to address national politics. In 1859, Rogers created the Slave Auction, a tabletop sculptural group that depicts a tragic outcome of chattel slavery. Though Rogers modeled this sculpture in Chicago, it was deeply informed by his 18-month residence in Hannibal, Missouri, where he had worked from 1856 to 57 as a master mechanic for the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad. And so I hope you can make out the details in Rogers's wonderful drawing of the town of Hannibal here at the right, including the Mississippi River in the background, the railroad's machine shop in the middle ground where he worked, his boarding house at the left labeled My Boarding House, and most wonderfully, his own legs and feet in the foreground, as he drew the view from Lover's Leap. And so the rest of his family, who he described as rank abolitionists, lived back in Massachusetts where he had grown up. And so he frequently wrote them letters. And so he made this sketch pretty early in his time in Hannibal, folded it up, you could kind of see the creased lines, and mailed it back east. So when he moved to Missouri from the East, it was the first time that he experienced the conditions of living in a state where slavery was legal. And auctions of enslaved people occurred with regularity in Hannibal and neighboring cities. And so this new living situation really opened the artist's eyes. He wrote to his family, quote, "The curse of slavery is dreadfully apparent here. I am not much of a politician. I never was. But I begin to see how things really are now." So in response to this dawning consciousness, Rogers deliberately included clues that represent the auctioneer's evil character. So his hair seems to curl into devil horns, and this is a little hard to make out, but in the red circle, what appears to be a tail peeks out from the back of his coat. So in turn, this sculpture, as a critic later wrote, touched the conscience of the nation and quickly became an icon of the abolitionist movement. So pottery, as we've seen, can be very pertinent to politics. This next sculpture communicated the political beliefs of its makers during the Civil War. So across this absolutely incredible example of folk sculpture, snakes writhe, insects scuttle, and men rush about in a frenzy. So the guy in the dress on the right is Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederate States of America, who allegedly disguised himself in his wife's clothing to escape arrest by Union soldiers. On the side of the jug, kind of beneath that Union soldier, appears a drawing of buildings which depict Anna Pottery, the place where this jug was made. This business was founded by the brothers Wallace and Cornwall Kirkpatrick and was located in the town of Anna, Illinois, somewhat near Carbondale in the southwest of the state. So the potters at Anna Pottery produced primarily utilitarian stoneware, such as these examples at the Union County Historical and Genealogical Society in Cobden, Illinois. And let me pause for just a moment to say that one of our greatest disappointments in this exhibition was that we ended up not being able to borrow this just totally amazing chimney pot that you see on the left here that comes from a house in Cairo, Illinois. And we weren't able to do it because it is in pretty fragile condition, and our fantastic conservators were worried about what it would mean, the dangers posed by transporting it. But just because it can't travel doesn't mean that you can't travel to see it in person. And I very much recommend it. We got such a warm welcome from the curators and director of this really terrific museum. Go visit. But to return to our snake jug that you can see at SLAM, the Kirkpatrick brothers who made this are best known today for their inventive, creative sculptures that sought to expose the hypocrisy of Victorian values. And so if one walks around the sculpture, one finds a Union soldier, who you can see here on the right, who has been imprisoned by snakes. And these snakes each have a dark dot on their head, which identifies them as copperheads. That term was also used to describe, during the Civil War, Northern sympathizers with the Confederate cause, who made up a large percentage of the population in Anna, Illinois. The Kirkpatricks, however, were not copperheads. They were radical Republicans who were kind of like the ultra-liberal progressives of our day. So they strongly supported the Union and abolition of slavery. So looking at this sculpture, we don't honestly quite know the circumstances about its commission. I mean, it could have been produced just kind of for the brothers' own amusement, to communicate their political beliefs. It might have been possibly commissioned by somebody nearby in their area who also shared those beliefs. But it's hard not to think kind of two things, or I think about two things. So one is the incredible courage it must have taken to create a sculpture that so drastically and aggressively opposed the dominant viewpoints in their area. And then two, I wonder if there is a bit of self-portraiture or self-identification here. Might they and other radical Republicans have felt like this particular Union soldier kind of being besieged by copperheads on all sides? So regardless of how the snake jug advocated or the messages that it sent, I think both it and then this work are good reminders that works of art can advocate for beliefs, even if such messages aren't explicitly intended by their artists. So in 1907, members of the Osage Nation traveled from St. Louis to Washington, D.C. to form treaties of alliance with the United States. And so the Osage Nation at that time, and very much still is, a sovereign power. So this was a diplomatic visit between two sovereign nations. And so while in the city, this particular man, whose name was not documented in conjunction with this portrait, so whose identity is currently unknown by me, but very well might be known by somebody out there. So this particular gentleman from Missouri who traveled to Washington, D.C., visited the city's most prolific portraitist who created this image of him. And so that portraitist is the French immigrant artist, forget his first couple names, he's just known as Saint Memon for simplicity's sake. So this sitter, this Osage sitter, followed in the footsteps of hundreds of other political leaders and elite visitors, Native and Anglo alike, and sat for a portrait by Saint Memon in an act of self-definition. And so he wears items that communicate his status, including a headdress made from a vulture's beak and hummingbird skins, and a silver armband engraved with an eagle holding the seal of the United States. So the artist, Saint Memon, did not intend for this image to advocate for the rights of its sitter or the Osage Nation more generally, which were in fact repeatedly undermined by the US government and its citizens in subsequent decades. But even though advocacy was not intentional on behalf of the artist, this portrait still forcefully asserts the specific individual personhood of its sitter, whose material presence demands that we pay attention to him, to his community, and to his story. And those were really the ideas we had in mind in including this work of art, which, let me note, has not traveled since the 1950s from Winterthur in Delaware in this section. So we are so grateful to have it here, and so grateful to our colleagues for lending it. So if St. Memon wasn't necessarily intending advocacy with that work of art, Lewis Hine's photographs are the opposite end of the spectrum, a very different case. And so they offer an even more explicit and direct example of how art can advocate. So beginning in 1906, Hine was employed by the National Child Labor Committee to investigate and document scenes of child labor across the United States. He visited St. Louis in May 1910 and photographed these three newspaper delivery boys, or newsies as they were called, at the corner of Jefferson Avenue and present-day Martin Luther King Drive. Hine also, while he was in the city, documented young workers at a type foundry, a glass company, and in transportation in St. Louis and East St. Louis. So I thought it would be interesting to compare the photograph in the exhibition, which is on the left, with another taken at the same time and the same place. So I hope the comparison makes clear why the one on the left has become iconic in the history of photography and a compelling advocate against child labor. So Hine very much hoped to inspire compassion for his subjects, and so he tightly framed his photographs to bring viewers into an intimate, humanizing encounter. The young boys on the left, who seem to swagger and smoke like their elders, seem prematurely hardened to life on the street. The National Committee for whom Hine worked later asserted that in no other occupation were children so unsupervised and exposed to physical danger and adult vices than newspaper sellers. So Hine declared that he, quote, wanted to show things that had to be corrected. And his pioneering work, like these photographs, led directly to federal legislation prohibiting child labor, which was passed in 1916. And so if you are curious to learn more about the story of the young boy in the photograph on the left in the center, whose name is Raymond Closey, I very much encourage you to listen to our audio guide. Thanks to really fantastic digging by a researcher, darn it, Joe, I'm completely blanking on his last name, but who ran a blog trying to investigate the histories of the children who Hine pictured. Thanks to his Joe Manning, there we go. Thanks to Joe Manning's great digging, Raymond Closey's story has been told in connection with this photograph. So go listen to the audio guide. So just a few blocks away from Skeeter's Branch, a group of artists worked 50 years later to paint a mural that powerfully demonstrates how art can advocate. So we're looking at a photograph on the left that shows the Wall of Respect mural with two men sitting in front of it. In the summer of 1968, volunteers from St. Louis civil rights groups joined together to paint this mural on a 3-story building located at that red dot, or that was located at the red dot on the map. This mural was intended, as one of its organizers described, quote, to bring on Black awareness and Black consciousness of Black history. And so here's a photo from the post that shows the Wall of Respect in its entirety. So it was inspired by the creation of a similar wall in Chicago the previous year. So the Wall of Respect memorialized 16 current and historic Black leaders. And so in Light's photograph on the left, we can see the portraits that have been painted of Ray Charles, James Baldwin, Jean-Baptiste du Sable, Leroy Jones, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, alongside a version of Marcus Garvey's exhortation, "Up, you mighty race." So this wall, this 3-story mural, quickly became, in the words of a supporter, a gathering place for meetings and performances, and a symbol of Black achievement and determination. And another commentator asserted that this project was entirely from the people. So unfortunately, this mural in the 60s and early 70s also became a target for vandalism. And I hope you can make out that part of the portraits, especially the one of Frederick Douglass, is effaced by white paint that has been thrown at the wall in an act of vandalism. But despite these acts, the mural held a central place in its community for over a decade before the building on which it was painted was destroyed in the 1980s. Nearly 50 years later, the St. Louis artist Damon Davis created another group of artworks that speak to and for his community in a project of activism that advocates for social justice. In the All Hands on Deck project, Davis photographed hands of 7 individuals involved in the protests following the 2014 fatal police shooting of Michael Brown Jr., an unarmed African-American teenager in Ferguson, Missouri. The image on the left here is included in the exhibition, but you can see the other photographs blown up at poster size in the photograph on the right, standing behind the gentleman in the green jacket, who is the artist, Damon Davis. And those other 6 images are actually also on view elsewhere in the East Building at SLAM, Gallery 212S, if you could find that. And they are up through February 2022. So while the pose here references the gesture reclaimed by the "hands up, don't shoot" slogan, the print's title expands its meaning towards a united fight for a solution. So after taking these photographs, Davis, along with a team of other artists and activists, then printed them out at poster size and pasted them on buildings in Ferguson, which were still open, as you can see in that sign that says "We're open" on the boarded up door. He did this in order, as he said, quote, "to raise hope and show solidarity. This is a problem that is going to take everyone to fix." That summary of this project and this work just barely scratches the surface of its importance. And so I very much urge you to turn in, not to listen to me talk about this, but to listen to the artist himself. So he is going to be giving an artist talk on December 2nd at 7 p.m., same place, same platform. I will be there listening avidly, and I hope you might join me. So our kind of last group in this section addresses relationships between nature and humans in the Confluence region. And so this first pair of works is known as, or comes from a series called the Sprawl series. And so the artist Mel Watkin embellished road maps to draw attention to issues of social and environmental well-being. So what we're looking at here, on the left, a map of the St. Louis metropolitan area is seemingly overrun by multicolored colonies of vegetal growth, or just forms, that seem to combat urban sprawl. And then on the right, because of course our exhibition looks at both Missouri and Illinois, we had to include maps of both Missouri and Illinois. So on the right, across a map of Illinois, green and orange fungal-shaped forms representing cities and forests wage battle. So Watkin, the artist, was inspired by the flora and fauna around her home in southwestern Illinois, and she lives very near where Anna Pottery was located in Cobden. So her drawings act as reminders that, as she describes, nature can rear up and assert its control over our lives without a moment's notice. However, the opposite circumstance, that humans' actions alter landscapes, has occurred, of course, with much greater frequency. And this particular instance of the town of Times Beach, Missouri, offers a particularly sobering example of this fact. So the town of Times Beach, Missouri was located along the Merrimack River, kind of near, well, very near Eureka, Missouri, very close to Six Flags, if that's a useful landmark. And it was founded in 1925 as a weekend resort community. It was actually founded as a promotion by a local newspaper that if you bought a subscription, you would also get a tract of land. However, you couldn't you couldn't build a house on that tract of land, so you actually had to buy 2 pieces of land. So just fascinating thinking about how communities develop across the land. Anyway, that's a total aside. By 1971, it was a vibrant community, home to about 2,500 year-round residents, as this photograph on the left hopefully shows, and you'll understand why I'm showing you this one in a moment. But the town also, tragically, suffered one of the nation's largest environmental disasters. In the 1970s, a contractor had sprayed the town's road with oil laced with the toxic chemical dioxin. In 1982, following a catastrophic flood of the nearby river, the town was declared uninhabitable and was entirely evacuated, following its designation as an EPA Superfund site. And so just like I encouraged you to come to Damon Davis's talk, I so ardently encourage you to go and listen to the stop on the audio guide associated with this photograph and one other. So we were so very fortunate to spend time with Marilyn Leisner, who was the last mayor of Times Beach, who oversaw this transition and this portion of its history. And she describes this history in just gut-wrenching terms, but in ways that I can't even begin to hold a candle to, as she has lived it, and then it really is one of its primary keepers of this memory and this oral history. So go listen to the audio guide. But we wanted to include in the exhibition photographs that dealt with the history of Times Beach. And so this one on the right is one of those. So the artist Sam Fentress here has recorded the pallets left behind as residents moved away from the town. His larger project that this is part of examines the placement of Christian signs in, sorry, let me say that more clearly, examines the placement of Christian signs in the American landscape. And so this billboard, its biblical verse, John 3:5, references baptism, a liquid of purification by water, which struck us as a pointed juxtaposition for a place so contaminated by liquids. In Emmett Gowan's later aerial photograph, here on the right, which is also in the exhibition, the lush foliage and a grid of streets betray no trace of the chemicals lurking below. In the wake of the town's evacuation, the land is returning to nature here, especially in comparison to the earlier photograph on the left. Gowan included Times Beach in a series of aerial photographs that recorded places where humans have radically altered landscapes. So like nuclear test sites, for instance, and others, mines, things like that. The photograph exemplifies Gowan's astonishment that, quote, in spite of all we have done, the earth still offers back so much beauty, so much sustenance. And now, finally, we have made it to the last wall and the last works of art included in the galleries of the exhibition. So these three photographs come from the ongoing project Significant and Insignificant Mounds, which is a collaboration between the St. Louis photographer Jennifer Colton and writer Jesse Vogler. Their project includes photographs of over 40 mounds in the American Bottom or the Mississippi River floodplain. And so in consultation with them, we included just these three in the exhibition. So in the early 19th century, St. Louis and the surrounding metropolitan region earned the nickname Mound City because of the numerous earthen mounds that dotted their landscape. These monumental earthworks were created between, very broadly, the years 900 and 1600 by the Mississippian culture, which was centered at Cahokia and flourished in the Midwestern and Southeastern regions of North America. Yet, just a fraction of these ancient mounds survive, as the majority were destroyed under the guise of urban and industrial development in the 19th and early 20th centuries. So, for example, the 1869 photograph on the right shows the destruction of Big Mound, the largest of the Mississippian mounds, situated just north of present-day downtown St. Louis. So the next time you drive on, I think, Highway 70, heading east across the Stan Musial Veterans Memorial Bridge, think about this mound, which stood right at the base of it on the Missouri side of the river. So instead, a layered history. So while we don't have many of the mounds themselves anymore, they've been destroyed. A layered history is embedded in the present day landscape, where the few remaining ancient earthworks, such as these two images of mounds at Cahokia on the left, share space with modern mounds in the form of landfills, slag heaps, and other remnants of industrial activity. And that is one on the right. And just as an aside, let me mention, if we were in person, I would ask you, is the photograph on the right a black and white photograph or a color photograph? Because I can't hear your answers, I'm going to tell you that it is a color photograph. That is not a black and white photograph. And it is just completely immersive in person. You just want to get up close to it, like don't actually press your nose to the glass, but get very close and understand like what we're actually looking at in terms of its subtle colors and textures. Let me go back. Did not want to reveal that yet. Colton's photographs draw our attention to shifts in land use and its contingent value, and how those changes over time reflect evolving cultural judgments. And so what I mean by that is the fact that in the ancient two ancient Mississippians, the mounds that they created, so the mounds at Cahokia specifically, held immense cultural value, political value. They were just crucial to their society. And we now have come to recognize their importance too. But in the 19th century, they were thought of as expendable or just in the way, or sources to be used for good building materials. So for instance, Big Mound, as it was dismantled, its remains were used to build a railroad along the dirt, basically was used to build a railroad along the Mississippi River in St. Louis. So Colton and Vogler want us to ask similar questions about our modern day mounds. We think of them today as just kind of eyesores or like things we don't want to consider, but they too are worthy of our attention, not because they hold huge cultural or religious or spiritual ideals like Mississippian mounds might have, but because they reflect how we view our relationship to the landscape. So in conjunction with the exhibition, let me go forward to this one, Colton and Vogler also designed and installed 6 billboards along roads in the Mississippi River floodplain in Illinois, just east of St. Louis. And so here are 5 of them. The 6th won't be installed until late December, so stay tuned. And so they, through these billboards, they've inserted photographs of mounds into the landscape where similar forms once stood. And they've combined mostly photographs by Jennifer Colton with historically derived words or phrases. And they've done this in order to call attention to questions about ownership, power, and the racial and cultural erasures that have occurred across this land. And so because the obvious question is, well, where are these things? Stay tuned. Our website will contain a page giving you that information. Like momentarily, it's going to come up in the next few days. But here is just a map at a glance to give you a sense of where they might be. Again, more information on our website to come. So they are at those red stars. And then here are the mounds that correspond to each one of them. So the mounds at the top left are actually visible only as you're driving across the Martin Luther King Jr. Bridge from St. Louis into Illinois. They're on the left or north side. And then the other 2 mounds are kind of more embedded in the landscape itself. So in the end, Colton and Vogler, through their project, proposed that, quote, each of these mounds on its own terms is both significant and insignificant, because in landscape, it all matters. It all has meaning. And so, in short, through this exhibition, we agree. And we very much hope that Art Along the Rivers has surprised you in some way and encouraged you to take a renewed, closer look at the objects made and collected in our region and the stories they tell. So make a second visit, make a first visit, make a 15th visit, if you're me, to this exhibition, and come discover new favorites before it goes away on January 9th. So as always, thank you so much for your time and attention. I see we have a couple questions perhaps. And as always, I'm so happy to chat.
Thank you so much, Amy. As always, wonderful job. In fact, one of those is actually just a comment saying that you're fabulous as usual, that you're a wonderful educator, and thanks again.
So kind.
So I will let people know, please submit your questions. If you have any, please submit them in the Q&A section. I actually have a question for you, which I believe at some point you maybe posed, and I'm not sure it got asked, but I'm going to ask you. You've spent a lot of time with these objects or studying, researching these objects. Is there an object in the exhibition that you would like to adopt? if you could?
Oh, I love that question. And yes, I totally ask people that question just all the time. So I'm glad I have this slide because it is a good reminder. And okay, as I'm pondering this, write in if you want to. What object would you adopt? This feels like a great question to ask. Okay, so the reason that I'm hesitating is because I love so many of them so much. So I feel like just in terms of pure beauty alone, I want to adopt the entire case of University City pottery. If you can see my mouse down here. I mean, who wouldn't want to take home the scarab vase? Again, let me, for the benefit of my colleagues across the institution, we are not actually advocating that you physically adopt any of these things.
No.
Maybe buy a postcard of them or take photographs yourself of them to contemplate. Okay, just caveat aside. So University City pottery, another that I just love for so many reasons. Where is it? Is this Index of American Design bag that was drawn that Melissa talked about last week, that was drawn by Dolores Haupt. I just can't physically wrap my mind around how you would make such a detailed drawing with watercolor. Gosh, they're all in section 4, aren't they? I mean, I love our gorilla, although he's kind of ours. I mean, he's equally all of the St. Louis art communities, art museums, right, object, because he lives here all the time. Yeah. Oh my gosh, there are so many. I love that miniature in that is kind of easy to overlook given all the stuff that's going on in the 3rd section. But this portrait of a young daughter and her father that's tiny. Jessica, what would you, okay, well, there might be other questions, but I want to know, yes.
That is, I should have thought about that before asking you that question, that you were going to turn it back on me. I mean, I'm going to be really honest. There's so many wonderful things, and historically, there's so many things you can dig deeper into, but that punch bowl, it is magnificent. It is just incredibly magnificent to see that in person. So that's got to be my first go-to. And I actually think this is great because we can mention for those of you who haven't gone to the exhibition or who are planning to go, there is a wonderful Explore Lab where you can go in and actually, you don't even have to go in there. You can do it from home right here on social media, where they've asked the question, and I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but basically ask the questions: what objects do you value, and why? And it can be objects that you value from the exhibition. It can be objects that you value in your own home. And so we really just like to share, photographs and kind of talk about why you value those objects. So in the Explore Lab, in the exhibition, there's a digital wall of those collections from people's social media accounts. So I encourage you to do that as well. That works out perfectly. And yes, we have a couple of questions here. Let's see. Sorry. All of a sudden, we just got a whole bunch of them.
It's so great.
Oh, interesting. If you could involve yourself in the process of creating one of these works, which would you choose?
Oh my gosh, I love that question, right? So my first kind of gut reaction is not an interesting one. It's, oh my gosh, you don't want me around anything visually creative, right? My creative acts are what you've been seeing for the last few weeks, right? Are the exhibition. But to take it in a more inventive way, I have become completely obsessed with the Great Pottery Throwdown. So I feel like I just have a completely new appreciation for ceramic objects or works of pottery made out of clay. So I feel like I would love to sit next to Adelaide Robineau as she made the scarab vase, or, I mean, this is actually something that can happen, Dan Anderson, who is a living local artist, as he makes, I hope you can see my mouse, vessels like this one in his contemporary studio in Illinois. So I mean, that's a pretty practical answer. Well, I mean, if one could be involved in anything. Right, I study old American art. So the opportunity to visit Winslow Homer's studio, when he was live in Prouts Neck, Maine, and watch him paint that seascape. Yeah, I wouldn't miss that one. Or to meet Cecilia Beau. Okay, I'm just gonna stop talking. Like it's everything.
I thought you were going to say Wurple. I could have sworn you were going to talk.
Yes. My complete obsession with Wurple. I love Wurple.
So there's here's another really good thoughtful question. So they said this, the themed approach without question as to the quality of the exhibit. I'm curious as to what other prominent themes were close to being considered but didn't quite make the cut.
You know, this is a wonderful question, like a really interesting one, because the themes that we decided on, I mean, a different set of curators could be given the same group of objects and probably come up with very different themes. I feel like there were plenty of works of art that didn't make the, I mean, that could have made the cut, but just didn't because of space. Because we really shaped the themes so tightly tied to the objects themselves, I unfortunately don't feel like I have a great list of like, you know, oh, well, here are 4 that we like, oh, that did it right to actually answer the question. Because we like, it was a very much back and forth process. We would say like, okay, I think for the first section that we might want to focus on the idea of travel to like give somebody a grounding space here. How did all of these things come in? And then we go out and think about, okay, what objects could fit this idea? And then come back and be like, well, if it's not exactly travel, it's like people who are going and people who are staying, right? So it was like refined really in dialogue with one another. But to answer your question, not just deflect it, a section that I think, like if we could add one to the show, I feel like I would really love for there to be a section on Missouri maps. Because I mean, it's like a little bit more specific and not quite as open-ended and evocative in terms of themes, but I like, we do a really good job of hoping that people think creatively about these objects. But if we had had another section, it might have been fun to gesture a little bit more towards history, and lay out in like more concrete ways. Okay, so like how did the Mississippian culture map their own areas? How did they understand this land for themselves? Then in like the 17th century, when the first European explorers, travelers came to this area, how did they map it? And then on and on and on. Mm-hmm. So that is a long rambling answer, yeah, but an answer.
And I feel like maps are often artworks on their own. I mean, there are so many that are
completely
so amazing.
Yes. Yeah, I 100% agree.
Okay, so I think this will be our last questions. Last question, rather. This one is actually specific. So the black and white photograph that wasn't really black and white. Someone has asked, where was that taken, and why was the location significant?
That's a really good question. And again, I'm sorry that I don't like have a phenomenal, I don't have an answer. But I could get you an answer or figure out where to get an answer. So it is less, so for all of Jennifer Coulton's photographs, she doesn't, I hope I'm speaking correctly on her behalf. I don't think she minds if people know if she's photographing, you know, if this is an ancient mound or a modern mound. But that ambiguity and that kind of confusion is part of what she wants us to maintain while approaching these works of art. So we discussed with her, like, so in the label on the wall, we said, do you want us to say that like the works of art on the left are ancient and this one's modern? And we said, we kind of don't want to do that, actually. We want people to be able to approach just mound without a preconceived notion of, oh, this is at Cahokia, therefore it's important. So this is a long way to say that the photographer, Jennifer Coulton, absolutely knows where this is. I don't off the top of my head, but I'm sure we can get it and share it with you if you are very curious. And we will, when we put the website up for the billboards, there will be links to Colton and Vogler's website, their own website that has much more writing and information about these mounds. And so the significance of this mound, which I believe is a slag heap, and it's somewhere in the American Bottom, so somewhere in this area around St. Louis, is more just it's standing as a slag heap, as like a type of modern or industrially created mound, rather than being a particular place, like Cahokia is a particular place. I'm sorry that that's not the most satisfying answer, but what I got.
Yeah, no, but that makes perfect sense. It's not necessarily meant to be known
Right.
immediately. Yeah, no, that's great.
Exactly.
Well, thank you. Well, thanks to everyone who joined us today. Thanks again, Amy, and thank you for all of your questions. So as Amy mentioned in her talk, if you'd like, we really would encourage you to register to join us on Thursday, December 2nd at 7 p.m. for an artist talk by Damon Davis. As we've heard, Davis's work, All Hands on Deck, is currently on view in this exhibition, and as well as in Gallery 212 South, I believe. But he will be talking about that work and other work that he other projects that he's currently working on. So I encourage you to join us for that. So go ahead and go to slam.org/events and sign up for that if you're interested. And there's a couple other things on there. And thank you so much for this, Amy. And this has been a really great series. And I hope everyone enjoys the exhibition.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jessica, for all of your organization, arrangement, and thank you all for attending. If we didn't have an audience, what would this be?
Right? It'd be no fun.
Exactly.
Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.